Okay. Well, welcome to the Future of Project Management. We are in Minneapolis here, and we are with Mark Price Perry, and he is the Senior Vice President and founder of BOT International.
Yes, it is.
He's written books, and he has some great ideas on PMOs, and we're going to talk to him today. Thank you, Mark, for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Yes, it is. So, Mark, you want to start off by telling us maybe a story about a PMO that converted to this business-driven approach and the kind of benefits they derived out of it.
Gosh, I could give a lot of examples of stories over the years, but my favorite one is a story of a small software company that decided that they wanted to have a PMO. The leadership team decided they wanted to have a PMO because the software company had grown.
Okay.
Their problems were one of success. And they realized that the innovation and approaches to the management of the business that served them well as a new start could not scale in support of their future growth. So they needed to operationalize best practices and behaviors, and specifically in a PMO context, they were very interested to get a better grasp of the projects of the company, both internal projects, development, infrastructure, and external projects that were the professional services implementation projects that they had with clients, for which the billable revenue of the professional services projects was about 50% of their business line. Okay. In this story, the leadership team considered the idea of a PMO. They had never had a PMO before.
Okay.
And they interviewed a bunch of candidates, and the first candidate that they interviewed was very, very talented. The second candidate that they interviewed was also very talented, and those two candidates made the final shortlist.
Okay.
Now, the first candidate was a certified PMP, had been a PMO manager at other companies, and they liked his profile and professional experience quite a bit, and felt that who better than an experienced PMO manager to do a PMO for an organization that never had one. The second PMO manager was extremely well versed and had deep business acumen in the type of lines that this company had in terms of sales, marketing, professional services, support, product marketing. But this person had never been a PMO manager before. Now, they liked both candidates a lot. The company hired the first candidate, the PMP certified PMO manager. And in week 2, that candidate presented a people process tools, cookie cutter strategy, and started the process of staffing the PMO, implementing a project management tool, in this case Project Server, developing a methodology, and developing a program for training and certification for the formal project managers. And to make a long story short, within 6 months, everybody was unhappy. And the reason everybody was unhappy was the strategy and actions of the PMO manager, though you can't debate the effort, they were not based upon business needs. Now, at the end of the 6-month period, the executive team responded that we appreciate where we are with this PMO, but the sales vice president was unhappy because the reason he wanted to have a PMO was to be able to increase the number of professional services projects to make quota. The professional services manager wanted a PMO because he was tired of the sales executives, after the deal was closed, agreeing with the customer on increased scope, but not changing the budget or schedule and leaving professional services on the hook. The business development manager wanted PMO because all the business development projects that he was looking after, like OEM relationships with partners, he was not getting the resources for those project initiatives because they weren't producing immediate revenue, because an OEM relationship usually produces no revenue immediately, but it's a future. The product development manager, who wanted a PMO, was unhappy because the reason the product development manager wanted a PMO was because for quite some time, the sales teams in complex sales situations where the product really wasn't a perfect fit, but a good enough fit, the sales teams would tell the client, well, we can get a product engineer and custom develop that capability. And though they would win the sale, by taking that product engineer off the product development plan, it would compromise the schedule. And no one would give the product manager a break, so he had a schedule. So I could go on and on and on, but the bottom line was this company considered a PMO to meet these business needs, but yet the traditional approach of how PMOs are set up oftentimes are done in a manner that is oblivious to business need. Make a long story short, after the first year, the PMO manager quit.
Okay.
Now the CEO in this real life example tried to convince him to stay, but he left. Now the CEO and leadership team had to decide, do we want to continue the PMO?
Okay.
Half of the team wanted to shut it down.
Okay.
We tried it. Our friends said not to do it.
Yeah.
At church, at the country club, everyone said it's a bad idea. The CEO and half the leadership team, however, thought it was a good idea,
Okay.
and some work had been done,
Mm-hmm.
but they did need to redirect it.
Correct.
Focus it more on the needs of the business, not just upon theoretical standards,
Correct.
tools, this and that. As fate would have it, the CEO called that other candidate,
Oh, the second one.
the one they passed
Okay.
over, explained everything that happened.
Okay.
By now, about a year and 3 months had passed.
Okay.
And the second PMO manager accepted the position of PMO manager.
Okay.
But when he started, he didn't advance a strategy in a second week.
Mm-hmm.
He scheduled a planning meeting with the leadership team to say, what are the business problems, and not 37, not 27, not
Correct.
10, what are the 3 business problems
Okay.
this year that your PMO can do for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, the second PMO manager basically engaged in business planning. So based upon business problems, how are we going to hold the PMO to account in terms
Okay.
of the fulfillment of meeting those
Okay.
objectives? And to fast forward, that was an example of the second PMO manager having a tremendous success and being of value to the organization
Mhm.
and addressing fundamental business challenges. In the big scheme of things,
Mm-hmm.
the difference between the first PMO manager and the second PMO manager was about that much. What I mean is, the second PMO manager still had people, process, and tools, kinds
Correct.
of things in his arsenal,
Yeah.
but those were the means to the end.
Right.
And the issue is,
Right.
it's not that those aren't important. The issue is, if we don't focus on the end to be achieved,
Correct.
we're likely not going to have a tremendous successful PMO.
Mm-hmm.
And hence,
Mhm.
it's to no surprise, not just this example, but if you look at the 2012 PMO research done by PM Solutions, in the PMO space, there's a lot of statistics by these research organizations like PM Solutions, PMI itself,
Mm-hmm.
the Standish Group, Forrester, Gartner. But the bottom line is 25% of PMOs fail within the first year, 50% of PMOs fail within the second year, and 75% of PMOs fail within 4 years. And these are permanent PMOs, not program offices that are designed to be temporary.
Yeah.
And in the research done in 2012 by PM Solutions, one of the top 5 issues was defining the purpose of the PMO.
Defining the purpose.
So hence my point is that the purpose of the PMO is not to develop a methodology, it's not to staff a team, it's not to implement a tool.
Correct.
The purpose is to understand in the project context of the organization the problems that the PMO can address and solve. Now for some organizations that might start
Right.
with the people, process, and tools.
Yeah.
But that's just the ante to a poker game. That's not the
That's
play of the
not-
hand.
Okay. Okay. Great. So Mark, you are passionate about this business-driven approach to PMO, to Program Management Office, and you gave a good example of this here. In terms of, and you gave some flavor of what it is, but for the audience there, would you like to elaborate on what it actually means? For example, if there's a PMO, which in your definition is a business-driven PMO, what are some of the metrics that they would be measured on?
Great question. I've long advocated that there's no such thing as PMO models.
Mm-hmm.
That this idea in the project management community, or if you go to Google or a PMI conference, there's always someone who's talking about PMO models, the weather station, the control tower, the report model, the controlling PMO, directive PMO, enterprise PMO, strategic PMO. I've long advocated that there's no such thing as PMO models.
Okay.
But I've tempered that perspective to say there actually is. There is a case to be made for PMO models, but it's not 27, it's not the traditional view of strategic, enterprise, IT, or departmental. There's really only 2 kinds of PMOs.
Okay.
PMOs that are driven by business need, and PMOs that aren't.
Okay.
It's just that simple. So you might ask, what are some of the business needs that an organization may have for which a PMO can serve?
Mm-hmm.
Like in that case of the Miami company that we talked about earlier, when the leadership team sat around the table to discuss not the 10 needs, not the 25 needs, but the 3 top needs, The first top need that they had was they wanted to have a better view of the total projects of the organization,
Okay.
internal and external, because at present there was really no view of that.
Okay.
The second need that they had was they needed to double the performance capacity for projects to meet up with demand.
Okay.
So they knew the growth of the company,
Yeah.
they knew the growth of projects, and they
Right.
knew that if they don't have the ability to double the capacity in 12 months, we won't meet demand.
Okay.
The third need they had was they needed a way systematically to manage projects, supply, demand, resources, risks, that was something more productive than spreadsheets and standalone documents.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of needs other than that, but those were the three
Three
needs.
needs.
And based upon those three needs, this organization set objectives
Okay.
for the PMO to say, here is our measurement of whether or not that need's been met.
Okay.
Now, some of those needs are subjective, like effective reporting in place in 90 days. We have to say, well, what's effective and
Correct.
is that time frame? So some are subjective, and it's really not so important that they're technically precise, but what's important
Right.
is that they are
Right.
mutually understood from a,
Correct.
do we have a shared vision of that which we're trying to achieve? Because the next question after we talk about the objectives is twofold. One is, what are the KPIs that serve as progress against that objective, which are not the 9 knowledge areas of the PMBOK,
Yes.
or the knowledge areas of the portfolio management standard, but they're
Correct.
going to be subsidiary measurements that serve as performance against that overall objective. That's going to be a key metric to consider. And the other metric to consider and revalidate annually or on a different basis is, what is the value to the business of having achieved that PMO mandate?
Right.
So if the leadership team says, do these 3 things, 1, 2, 3,
Right.
the next question is, okay, as the humble PMO servant leader, I sign up, I'll do those, but as a leadership team, why don't we have a brief discussion?
Correct.
What's the value to you of having
Right.
done that? And that's the value of the PMO, not going from some theoretical maturity level of 1.2 to 2.7, but
Right.
it's having a goal, achieving that goal, having a leadership determined mandate, fulfilling that mandate, and having the leadership team determine the value of that. And that's the metrics, that's the KPIs, and that's the value.
Yeah, it resonates with me so much. Especially you mentioned precise. Some PMOs try to measure things at such a precise level that do you really need that?
No.
And it's really hard. It's really hard to do that.
Well, take the case of a project in earned value management.
Yeah.
If we were building a 3-story parking garage with one S-curve, I could probably tell you with some degree of accuracy what I need by way of steel, concrete, wood, maybe some decals and stickers.
Yeah.
And with the exception of weather and parking permits, I can probably tell you what the schedule and cost is and
Okay.
use EVM.
Right.
But for most PMOs, that's not our project mix. They're far more complex, they're far
Correct.
more adaptive.
Correct.
And the idea that we can, when we know least about the project, cast in concrete
I know.
that which we're going to achieve. And the other thing,
Yeah.
as advocated by PMO experts like Steve Rollins and Gerald Kendall in their very fine work on project portfolio management, the reality is, for most organizations, the real issue isn't the management of technical measures like scope, time, and cost. The real issue is, what is the product of the project benefit?
Yes.
And we may be perfectly happy to miss schedule or to miss time
Correct.
to realize the benefit.
Correct.
And that serves as a good example in that most project managers in the PMO industry categorically have misapplied the project manager triangle. The project manager triangle, scope, time, and cost, was and is intended to identify project biases. It never was intended to be a measurement system
Right.
for whether you're a good or bad project manager.
It's not an end by itself.
No.
It is not. You were in sales and marketing for 16 years when you started out your career. How did you land up in the project management space?
That's a good question. I joined IBM in 1981 and had a pretty long career with them, almost 20 years. But from the very beginning, though I was in the sales and marketing capacity and went from a marketing rep to staff to manager to staff to branch manager to staff to general manager, out to Japan and into Asia and then over to India.
Okay.
In those capacities, part and parcel to what we did were projects.
That's true.
In 1982, I was involved in a low-level program office to drive the transformation of IBM from a purchase, I should say, from a company in which you lease mainframes to a company in which you purchase them. Think of all the organizational challenges. And I would say in my 17 years with IBM, I was probably involved in more than a half a dozen program offices. One to launch DB2, another to deal with the 1987 financial restructuring of savings and loans industry agreements, where during that period of time, these institutions were in receivership. Y2K PMO. In Japan, double byte character set readiness PMO, translating U.S. software for the Japanese market. These projects and these PMOs are never going to be in the formal PMO mix of your PPM tools like CA Clarity and PlanView. But these are very real program offices and project management offices. And one would argue, and I would maintain, that the collective value of all that we call business as usual projects may be greater in value than the formal projects of our formal PMOs. So though I was in sales and marketing for the first 2 decades, I just, from the very beginning, embraced the idea of project management as a means to an end. I think what makes my perspective a little bit different is I've always viewed project management as a means to an end, not the end of itself. And I viewed a PMO as a means to an end, not the end of itself. So imagine my surprise when I found myself in the project management community 20 years later, where people viewed the PMO as the purpose of a PMO is to be the organization that develops practices for how you manage projects. I'm saying that's not the purpose of a PMO. So that's kind of where I've come from. And I think that backdrop is one that's very complementary to project management's profession, and it's one that inherently views project management as the benefits it brings about, not as some sort of staff function that we just manage whatever projects come our way.
That's true. That's true. And you do a lot of speaking, you do a lot of teaching, coaching. What are some of the trends that you're seeing out there? And what if I were to ask you, what is your vision for project management? How would you articulate that?
2 great questions. The trends are all about us. And the trick is, do we recognize them and do anything about them? Or do we wait till it's so apparent that we have to deal with them? So it's one of, do we proactively step outside the box and receive what's going on? Or do we stay inside the box and just have blinders? Many people would advocate, as an example, that the formal project management industry, say PMI and their standards, have had sort of a blind spot for Agile over the years. It's kind of gone from we're going to ignore it, we're going to resist it, to now we're going to embrace it. But I guess my vision is, and a vision that I'm very passionate about, is a multi-dimension vision that says, at the end of the day, all organizations have maturity landscapes for project management that really fall into one of 4 kinds of quadrants. And what I mean by that is, if you take a look at how you manage project-related work, at one end of the spectrum you have plan-driven project management, scientific management, Taylorism, all that stuff that our Agile friends reject. At the other end of the continuum, you have complex adaptive systems. It's the management of project-related work with less formal guidelines, self-organizing teams, emergent behaviors, no boundaries. So if you take a look at how you manage project-related work, from scientific management to complex adaptive systems as one dimension, and on the other dimension, if you take a look at projects as being the formal projects of an organization in terms of that which is going to be found in their PPM portfolio, and then the informal projects of all the business as usual projects, you really end up with a quadrant of maturity landscapes that the traditional PMO community, for the most part, is somewhat in the plan-driven project management techniques for the formal projects of the organization, which is really one of 4 quadrants. There's another 3 that they're not playing in. Now, the Agile folks, they've been in one of the quadrants for years, and that is using adaptive techniques to the formal projects. But both the traditional project management community and the traditional Agile community really are not involved in the business as usual projects. A good example, if you go to a marketing organization or legal department or sales organization, and you ask someone, what's PMI, they'll think you're talking about private mortgage insurance. Or if you ask them what's Prince 2, they'll think you're talking about the brother of the future King of England. So the point is, our professional industry associations really are siloed in a formal plan-driven project management of the formal projects, which is a very important silo. But once you get to a certain degree of maturity, and a lot of experts suggest that level might be like a level 3 from a maturity index scale, that if you're at level 3 of technical project management, you're done. And that the reality is the time, cost, and effort to get to higher levels of maturity is
Right.
not competitive with addressing these ubiquitous areas of project
Yes.
management and these other non-plan-driven
Correct.
techniques.
Correct. It's strange you know gave the example of marketing, because some of the software that I see, the way people are trying to market software, for example, A/B testing software, those kind of companies are trying to market the software to the marketing folks, and their pitches, you do not need to involve your IT department to do this. Do this. This is what you see. You can do it yourself. No need to involve these IT guys. Do it yourself. That's one of their pitches, and it's working. It is working. One other question I had is, you are the founder of BOT International, and you're also the host of the PMO Podcast.
Yes.
For these project managers, program managers, and managers of project managers who are watching, if they are looking at starting out their own businesses, you are an entrepreneur yourself, and I think PMO Podcast has more than 220 episodes, I found.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give them? Any piece of advice? Yeah.
My advice is always the same, is try to find that which you're passionate about.
Okay.
At the end of the day, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you're not going to be satisfied. You're probably going to stop growing as a professional. You probably won't have that adrenaline rush that makes you excited about Monday morning versus dreading Monday morning. Now, having said that, there's a lot of value to working with large organizations. The near 20 years I spent with IBM were wonderful, and there's a lot of things that when you work with a large organization, a government organization, even a smaller organization, there's a lot of things that you can learn and do that you will never be able to do in your own company.
Correct.
However, there's a lot of things in your own company, whether that's a one-person practice or a small 5, 10, 15-person practice, there's a lot of things that you can be responsible for and be passionate about that you will never be able to do in a larger company.
Okay.
So the trick is trying to understand and find out what you're passionate about, and based upon your passion, are you where you need to be? Both physically, in terms of am I at the company or at the place of work I need to be, and mentally. So the 2 points of advice I give, and I know they're perhaps fluffy and kind of airy in nature, and that soft, touchy-feely stuff.
Yeah.
But the 2 points, again, the passion. And the second point of advice, that's a story as well, that I give people is get in the habit of reading 1 book a week.
A book a week.
A book a week. Now, this may sound like, why bother? But I'll tell you, one of the things that was very beneficial in my career, when I was promoted to general manager of IBM, I had a boss, and we were having our meeting about performance plan responsibilities.
Yeah.
I was in Singapore, and he was in Tokyo.
Okay.
And he flew down to meet with me, and he was reviewing with me my performance plan.
Okay.
And in the performance plan, it had read 1 book a week and write a 1-page report on it.
Oh, okay.
Now, here at the time, I was a general manager of IBM with a very large revenue quota, a customer sat quota, a profit margin target.
Right.
And I kind of made an offhand remark that said, well, look, amongst the revenue and profit and customer sat, we don't really need this book method. And he looked at me in the face and said, if I didn't want to read a book a week and report back on him, I'm welcome to go back to the United States.
Oh.
His point was, it's so instrumental and valuable to a professional, whether it's an individual contributor, manager, or general manager, to continually broaden your perspectives, that it's essential as part of your, not just professional development, but the things that you need to do. And that was a habit I got into, reading 1 book a week. At first it was a chore,
Yeah.
but then very soon it became a pleasure. And I just can't tell you how many thoughts, ideas that I've learned over the years, sometimes even discussions with other authors,
Yeah.
or things that I would have never, ever, ever
Correct.
even known about
Correct.
had I not been told, if you don't read a book a week, you're fired.
Yeah.
So that's basically the 2 advice. Find your passion
Yeah.
and read a book a week.
Right.
And now back then we didn't have podcasts and videocasts
Yeah.
like you're doing, so maybe I'd temper this now by saying, if you can't read a book a week, find a videocast like yours and listen to 1 of those a week
Right.
and substitute for a book.
Right. You mentioned there are some things in a large organization that you may not be able to do in your own organization as a small organization. Something that you are responsible for and are passionate about. Is there a specific example you can think about that you could not do in IBM, but now you can do it in BOT International?
Well, there's a lot of examples. I guess in my perspective, I have many character flaws. One of my biggest character flaws is not being able to accept things that don't seem right,
Okay.
not being able to accept things that don't seem fair, and being told to follow a process or do something that makes no sense.
Okay.
When you're with a large company, a lot of times there's information that you're not privy to,
Mm-hmm.
that at the present, what you're doing may not seem like it makes sense.
Right. Right.
Think of all those rollouts of CRM that you go tell professionals, okay, you had a week of activity, go enter your time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Almost always the initial deployments of those kinds of things are going to be fraught with execution difficulties, but unless they're done and worked out over time, some organizations may never have the actual data they need to make decisions. And that's the good side. The bad side is sometimes these tools are rolled out so poorly that you're never going to get where you need to go, and it's a public secret. It's the elephant in the room, and everybody knows about it. And when you're a large company, sometimes you just have to be quiet and accept it and have the feeling that this too shall pass.
Correct.
I've never been good at holding my tongue and being able to accept that one day this too shall pass.
Right.
I think in small companies, oftentimes, your strategies are just as ineffective and non-perfect as large companies, but the resolution is very self-correcting. When you're in a small organization, you don't push on a bad strategy very long. It self-corrects very quickly.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's a good example. What are some of your other hobbies and interests?
Well, that's a good question. I like to read, of course.
Okay.
From a sports perspective, I enjoy golf, and I like to snowboard.
Okay.
And then I guess from an artistic perspective, I can't play like I once could play, but I enjoy playing the trumpet, the piano, the guitar, and the violin. So I have a couple of instruments that there was a time that I could make music. Now I think I make noise. but I find them very relaxing, and sometimes if I've had a very stressful day, if I can just get lost in an hour in maybe classical music or some jazz,
Right.
my equilibrium is restored.
And that